Wonderful, thank you very much. This is the Truth Breakfast Show. My name is Mama D, where if you've been following our presentation since Monday, was yesterday, we are paying special respect to Africa, Pan-Africanism. Yesterday we had the Ghanaian ambassador here. Today we are privileged to have with us the ambassador of the Republic of Cameroon, and his first name is a little bit difficult, so like the last one, Augustine. And Ambassador, good morning and welcome to the Truth Breakfast Show. Good morning, Mamadi. How was the full Diakite. I prefer my father's name, it's the Gang. Gang. Very easy. Gang. Gang. What's the middle name? Beng'yela. Yeah, the apostrophe to get it together give me a little bit of problem. Well, it happens. Thank you very much. And let me say happy National Day to you. Today your country is celebrating this National Day. And then I wish you all the best. Cameroon is a very strong country in the region, although you are far away from us a little bit, but we want to wish you all the best on your National Day. Thank you for that thought. It shows that my first impressions of you were justified. Thank you very much on behalf of my country. Okay, I'm a little bit flattered with that. Yes. Now, give me the brief historical account of Cameroon. Sincerely, we've not been following your country for a very long time here in Liberia, or I may say, I have not been. So put us all in a very strong perspective as to the history of the country. Thank you for acknowledging that lack of information. Sincerity is the hallmark of the good intellectual and a good journalist, as a matter of fact. Thank you. And we generally don't know much about each other in Africa, so it's nothing very new. And Cameroon happens to be just on the eastern border of the ECOWAS zone, and so sometimes people think that it is not part of the sphere that they should pay attention to, but it's very hard to be brief on the history of Cameroon, but I will endeavor to do so. Among the first people from outside to get to the Cameroon coast were people from North Africa, followed later by the Portuguese, who came and met the local settlements of initially in the interior, some people say dominated by the Pygmies, and sometimes by the Fulani movements across Africa. It is the Portuguese who gave the name Cameroon because they found a lot of prawns and shrimps in the creeks around the zone which we would popularly call now Bakassi. Okay. And so they said, no longer disputed. We have resolved that with our neighbors and with the assistance of the International Court of Justice and the and other friends. So this was the river of the prawns, Rio das Camarões in Portuguese. So it's from there that the name Cameroon was born, and the Germans later succeeded to take this part of Cameroon, of Africa, during the 1884-1885 Berlin conferences, and changed the name to Cameroon with a capital K, A-M-E-R-U-N, and the Germans were defeated in the First World War and lost their territories in Africa and elsewhere to the French and the English, who put a knife between the two, Cameroon into two parts. The part near Nigeria became the southern Cameroons, with another part to the north, which was the northern Cameroons, English-speaking. Controlled by the British. Later controlled by the British and governed initially through Nigeria, and eventually ceded to Nigeria during the plebiscite of 1961. And the French took the eastern side, which became Francophone. And in the period 1946 up to 1960 were the struggles for independence and also reunification. And in that process, the Francophone side got independence first because the French, under pressure from the United Nations, finally went through a series of concessions. From the Arcan, the representative assembly that was granted, to the territorial assembly that was granted, to the legislative assembly that was granted in 1957, and to the appointment of a quasi-state which had a French governor, Mr. Pierre Mesmer. That was by 1956.
758, first prime minister is appointed, quarrels with the governor, and eventually Mr. Ahijo became the prime minister of this quasi-state in 1958, and which attained independence in 1960, 1st of January. And the English-speaking side also in the same process of independence claims, also evolved to become a part of a zone that was not longer administered as part of Nigeria, having its own local assembly, and went to a plebiscite in 11th February 1961, which accepted to join and join the East Cameroon, which was Francophone, at the same time as it acquired independence. But by some freak of international politics, the northern part of English-speaking Cameroon was separated from the southern parts during this plebiscite, and that part voted by a majority to join Nigeria, while the southern part voted to join East Cameroon to form the country. And so we continued in this state of the Federal Republic of Cameroon till 1972, when by the what is called the Peaceful Revolution of 1972, 20th May, there was a referendum which moved us from the federal.
I think that's the history of your National Day.
That is why we have our National Day on that day, because it was the first thing that was done by both parts of the country to unite. Instead of our Independence Days, which are separate, because the Anglophone part of Cameroon got independence on the 1st of October, 1961. So it's hard to choose one real Independence Day for Cameroon. And so for convenience sake, and that is why we use 20th May as our National Day. And today is the 42nd anniversary of that National Day.
But honestly, you were once on the United Nations trustee?
Yes, as I told you, it's hard to be brief on the history of Cameroon, because during the League of Nations, Cameroon was a mandate. That's from when the Germans were driven out in 1916, and then it was followed by the Versailles treaties in 1919, and by 1921 and thereabouts, we became a mandate of the League of Nations. And this continued till the creation of the United Nations, by which virtue we were converted into a trusteeship of the United Nations, no longer a mandate. And that is what we were living under until the wind of independence, and that's how the trusteeship ended.
So if we ask for your colonial powers, who will you be pointing to?
Oh, we will be pointing to Germany,
originally,
from 1985 to 1916, to France and Britain from 1916 de facto, and 1920, 1919, 1921 de jure, till 1960 and 1961. Those are our colonial.
Three colonial powers.
But we never really considered ourselves, except perhaps under the German dominance, as a colony. We were not a colony of France, we were not a colony of the British, we were trusteeships. And that is why our history is very linked to the United Nations.
Not necessarily under the three colonial powers?
No. Well,
so which system we practice? Is it British, English, or the German?
Well, I speak first English, my wife speaks first French. It shows you how we interact in Cameroon. And the two legal systems continue to interact. On the English-speaking courts, we operate the common law system, and in the French-speaking courts, we operate the civil law system. But other issues like penal laws and codes have been harmonized. In the educational system, we continue to function also in a dual capacity. We do write exams such as the brevet and the baccalaureate in the French-speaking system, and we do write the General Certificate of Education for the English-speaking system. That's why people with such qualifications can get admission in Liberia or in such other English-speaking countries.
I understand. So in government, for example, in parliament, which language do you use? Both?
Both. Interpreters are very available, and they do carry out a very good function. Constitutionally, laws must be passed in English and French, and when documents are signed, they are officially in English and French.
Wonderful. Your country is referred to as Africa in miniature for its vast identity and cultural heritage and the rest of it. Where do we stand with a country of over 200 linguistic, a kind of complicated background, but still you maintain social cohesion? What is the secret event?
Well, the rallying motto is unity in diversity.
That is the motto?
Yeah.
So there where you stand with the peaceful coexistence we've been having?
Yes. We do respect our different subcultures. We give a lot of attention to our different religious groups, Muslim, Christian, so on. Semi-Arabic, Pygmies, English speaking, French speaking.
You are a true identity of Africa.
Thank
Every
you.
bit and pieces we find in Cameroon. Okay, that's just a brief outlook of your beautiful country. I think we had a very strong lesson on Cameroon today, and those out there will now understand when we say what is Cameroon. So let's move to the continent. Today we are celebrating African Pan-Africanism. We're talking about the road towards the formation of the Organization of African Unity. Kwame Nkrumah specifically called for the United States of Africa, a continent that will stand alone. And we've come a very long way. Now, my question to you: do you think that unity as proffered by Nkrumah can be anything possible?
We live on hope. We live and work towards our aspirations. Of course, it's an aspiration which we all adhere to, and it's a necessity. It's not a luxury. We therefore believe that that objective remains valid today. It's left for the new generations to believe in it, to continue to work for it. In any case, Cameroon's past history shows adherence to the same objectives. Today, of course, there are more challenges than there were 50, 60 years ago, but definitely unity is, if not the solution, it's one of the major solutions to African issues.
Okay, we'll come to that. Well, let's give Cameroon's role and contribution to the quote-unquote unity or formation of the OU. What role Cameroon played historically in this whole Organization of African Unity, if any?
Well,
especially with your first president.
Well, with our first president, Mr. Ambassador Hijo, you would like to know that in 1959, when the Sanikwele conference was taking place, we were not yet a full-fledged independent state, as I told you. 1959, I think it was in February, if I'm not mistaken. The Prime Minister of Cameroon, East Cameroon at that time, attended that conference. And it was also an opportunity to sign a few agreements and to establish a few fundamental linkages between Cameroon and Liberia. Okay. And also it's interesting to note the role of Liberia, which was prominent by an important lady from Liberia, working at the United Nations at the time. Angie Brooks. She was very prominent in the fourth decolonization committee in which these issues were taking place. And so Cameroon attended that conference and was a party to every important pre-OAU conference that took place. As a matter of fact, Mr. Hijo attended every single Organization of African Unity conference and spoke once or twice on behalf of the organization. President Ambassador Hijo was present at the inception of the African Union in Addis Ababa, and in 1963, and you can say that I can quote what he said: "We have come to this extraordinary meeting in Addis Ababa with the conviction that it must and will mark a major decisive stage in our march towards freedom and the building of African unity." That is what he thought.
Okay, so Cameroon was on the
side. To think that he must have been there.
Okay, so he was on the side of having a united Africa.
Yes, But you know there were nuances as to the approaches, the functional approach, the sectoral approach, and all these issues about the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group and other medium groups and so on, which sort of distorted the initial commitment, or apparently distorted the initial commitment of our leaders to the African Union or Organization of African Unity. But this, I think, was mostly a question of strategy and a question of the influences from our past colonial connections and the like.
Okay, with different background historically when it comes to colonization, do you think the political unity of Africa is really possible?
The political unity...
We have the French, we have the Anglophone, we have the Maghreb.
Yes, the political unity of Africa is possible. The political unity of Africa is possible because other people with more violent antagonisms in other parts of the world have been able to put these kinds of disagreements on the sidelines and have been able to forge towards institutions which operate for their common good. If they have been able to do that, then we, with less antagonisms than they, we who have not fought historic wars against our neighbors, are starting off from a better podium, if you may say so. But it depends also on the will of the citizens and the political leaders to sometimes cede apparent sovereignties in defense of the collective good and of collective sovereignty, ipso facto of individual sovereignty. This is a very difficult factor to harness when you look at people's egoisms, national egoisms, which are sometimes being created instead of being reduced. So I think it is quite a possibility. And why is it a possibility? It's also because sometimes the leaders may be trapped into these situations of egoisms, nationalisms, and so on. But people like you, with the kinds of program you are leading, are doing a marvelous job. Probably you don't measure the impact and the implication of what you're doing, but you know sometimes leaders too have to be held to ransom by the citizens. It means that if the citizens of Liberia interact very naturally with the citizens of Sierra Leone, there's very little that the leaders can do to stop these connections. And eventually roads are built, eventually business people make joint projects, journalists get to know each other across the border, and sometimes the leaders have to join the bandwagon. Yes.
And do the right thing.
And do the right thing.
What do you identify as Africa's major constraint, our problem? Somebody on my show a few years ago said leadership is Africa's problem.
Well, leadership is Africa's problem, but from the definition I have just given you, it shows you that sometimes the people's will prevails over leadership.
No, but sometimes we have the leaders who are not focused, who are attracted by triviality. The main objective of state building, nation building can be placed at the background.
Yes, that is quite true, but also there is the element of elections. And if people decide to activate Pan-Africanism as a political agenda, it means if that were critical to the feelings of the citizens, they would vote somebody because he likes African unity, or vote him out because he doesn't like African unity. That is why the approach of education and communication that it deserves, and the leader gets the citizens it deserves also sometimes, you know.
But do you think it's about time we go above that? That we get the best sometime?
No, because it is an adage. You don't go above adages. They are fixities and the governors. It means we shall always have the leaders that we deserve. If you observe, for instance, in American politics, and there are always this seesaw results in elections. Maybe a leader becomes too strong on international politics and people get angry and they vote the next time a leader who is strong on internal economic and social policies, and then he fails on one or two issues, and then they get somebody who is strong on international issues, back and forth. It shows a fluctuation in the people's desires and perhaps the quest for a middle road.
Okay, we have political independence, no doubt. You think our political independence is secure in the absence of economic independence?
Definitely, the Nkrumahs and the Ahijos of that time said that was not possible. They said political independence was merely an instrument and a process. In the final analysis, I think the objective is the social welfare of our citizens. It is not the political independence per se. The political independence needs expression in social welfare. It needs an expression in economic development, home-based economic development, and those types of factors. And so it is very clear that the political independence was merely a stage to other issues. Once we got the first political independences, if you permit, it was discovered that there were parts of the continent that were not independent. The focus then was to get them to be independent. When this flow of independence had come happily to Africa, then the game changed and economic issues were now paramount. This again is part of Mr. Ahijo's comments at that time. Even more on the economic than the political level, African unity will be our salvation. That's what he said. In the face of the activities of the combined and gigantic concentrations that exist these days or are being established, which of our countries is capable of defending its interests unaided? Dependent in general upon fluctuations in world prices, our economies are struggling up the arduous slope of development and industrialization. The realization that we are amongst the outcasts of what we call the developing and committed nations is to bring more than ever home the need for us to be organized and united. The focus was clear. The focus was clear and remains clear.
Well, up to now we've not attained economic independence.
Up to now we have not.
Because the West is determined.
We have not attained economic independence. The issue is whether we are fighting for economic independence, and the issue is how to attain that. Of course, we are living in a context where it is usually said that the government must lay their hands off economic issues and let the private sector take control. There are risks in this approach. And there are risks in this approach because as the economic crisis of the 2008 and thereabouts in the United States shows, no government really believes in this.
That is becoming a new theory now you bring it on board?
No, it's not a new theory.
It's a common thing that the private sector is an engine.
The public sector is an engine for growth.
No, the private sector.
The private sector is an engine for growth.
Yeah.
The public sector creates the environment. But you saw that there were banks failing and big car companies failing, and the expression came too big to fail. That was all said all over the world. And government money went to subsidize companies that were failing, because that was the whole social structure failing, and no government could allow that. Now, for us African countries without strong private sectors, there is a need for a kind of balance. Of course, we are not challenging capitalism. It is a natural tendency for people to want to make profit, but at the same time, if you are to taste a European on his ability to eat okra, the slimy soup that we eat with our dumplings and other things, you will find him very ill-equipped at table. But if you were to judge him on his capacity to eat spaghetti, you would find him competent. Sometimes Africans are being judged on domains in which they are not expert. They are not expert, and because the game plan is not drawn by us, it requires some balance, and that is why, of course, we speak about these whole issues of. In those old days when we were young people, there were issues of the new international economic order which were put under the table. And there were such organizations, branches of the United Nations, of the UNCTAD, which were committed to trade and development, the UNIDO, Industrial Development Organization. You see that these are the kinds of organizations that have been sort of reduced in competence over the years. What I am merely trying to say is that perhaps at the stage of our development where we are, you cannot actually put out the private sector completely. Take public transport in most countries. Public transport is not targeted to provide profit per se. It is targeted to provide service and to at least balance its expenditure with its revenue. Because people need to go to work and produce, and the government takes this responsibility. When you give it to the private sector, of course, they want to make profit, and people don't go to work because they can't pay transport to go to work. So it shows you that somehow, somewhere, people say these things, but not everybody believes or applies.
So we should not leave the private sector to just operate.
Exactly. Perhaps, like in most countries, the creation of those industries may need, you know, these are all speculative analysis, you know, nobody is sure about these things, although some people claim to be very expert, but you know, sociological issues are not so easy to fit in with the black and white dichotomy. There are nuances and hazes of difference which sometimes are not well respected. So I'm saying, perhaps your son cannot create an industry, then you are the father, you create it, and you say, okay, son, come on board, take on from here. Because when we liberalize and where we sell to the private sector, the result is that it is not Africans that buy. And the consequence is that these industries are in our countries, sometimes they're not owned by us, but they are the germs of conflict also. Because, you know, in as much as international business is required and requested to come in, and we are into open systems of communication in the new world, it is comfortable for external investors to find that the local investors are also part of the game, that they feel that the structures in place are useful to them. Or else, in the long run, what do you find? You find antagonisms and reactions which are very unwholesome. That's why I say this. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I think.
I think you made some point on that.
Yes. You don't see the influence of the West to develop contributing factors.
Let me just make that clear. When I say leadership, yes, we are all on this boat.
Okay.
It's not about putting everything on the table of leadership. When an African not doing very well and takes the training given to him in the University of Liberia as a medical doctor, in the University of Yaoundé as a medical doctor, and moves off to Europe and reinforces the European medical system, he thinks he's reacting to the leadership crisis in his country. What he's actually doing is aggravating the leadership crisis, aggravating the service inadequacies of his country. But when you ask him, he will say, oh, the leadership, they didn't pay me well. But perhaps with some kind of resilience, with some kind of determination, he too could have helped by maybe moving out of the government sector, opening his clinic, and maybe charging a little bit more than the government, and upgrading the service in his country. But this approach, and again I say it's speculative analysis, nobody should tell you that he is very sure of the way these things are going. But you can, with some personal observation, analysis, arrive at, these are more questions than solutions that I am talking about here. So maybe you can continue with the question. I just wanted to say the responsibility is our leadership and our people.
I'm looking at the due influence on a part of the West, you know, sometimes they have on these African leaders.
Well, each country,
especially through the war ban in the IMF.
Each country has its leaders, and each leader has a duty to satisfy its own people. And again, I told you about the influence of the people. The people are becoming more and more educated. They do observe. They do understand where their influence is. it comes election time. Do they vote for the person that they think is less exposed to undue influences? No. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. But therein, I think, also lies the issue, because if we just blame the West, we are forgetting that each president of each country has a duty to satisfy the needs of his or her own people. If they can get a free rubber or palm oil or gold or whatever from another part of the world, that is what world trade is all about, and that is what leadership for each country is about. It is left for you to know that I need to find a way to argue for a better price for my gold. And this is where African unity also comes into play, because I think we should not lose focus on what we're saying.
And this is
that you can actually be in a situation where, because you know the price at which Sierra Leone is selling its gold, and you know at what price, I don't know, Congo, DRC is selling its gold, be able to have a better negotiating platform, or maybe to interact with them. But if we just accuse the other people, then we are not getting out of our situation. As to international organizations, we know how they are constituted, we know how their voting powers are constituted. It is for us to find ways, and possibly through unity, to meet up with the challenges that are posed from there. And they do give good advice, and it is for us to pick and choose amongst what they give us advice, and sometimes to accept to suffer. To accept to suffer. The Chinese suffered to get where they are today. We want to get it for free.
And some of the countries in Africa right now, the issue of homosexual activities, legitimizing it for aid.
Well, again, the population in most countries shows its leadership what it wants and doesn't want, and I think this has so far come out as a domain in which most of the population have shown what they want. It's an ongoing battle, and I think part of the success for those advocating for those things is that they have got it onto the radios and to the television. As far as I'm concerned, that is the initial objective, and it's working very well for them. And it's left for us to have means of education and to have means of communication between ourselves, because that is what it comes down to. It's a cultural battle. I remember one African official saying, you make ethical choices to accept homosexuality. You make ethical choices to accept polygamy. And it depends on who has the power to impose his own
and the conditions.
Ethical choices on the other. But these are ethical choices. We decide that incest is a taboo. The issues that some people are trying to rationalize and make these things look scientific, and to say these are just stupid taboos and these are clever taboos and so on. It's taboo versus taboo. I think sometimes it depends on the economic power to defend one's own taboos.
For our country like you, if you want to offer some advice, pieces of advice as it relates to Pan-Africanism, what will you be talking about?
No, I won't give advice. The President of the Republic is well educated on these issues. She attends most of the meetings that I observe here. So I won't give advice to the Liberian government. I would make comments to the African population in general, as an African myself, not as somebody clever or philosophical, but to say we must suffer for what belongs to us. We must know that to build a house is harder than to lease or rent a house. We must therefore know that Africa is for me, it's the most interesting continent. It's the only continent in which the young people can get up and build their own houses and take pride in building. The rest of the young people across the world have things inherited from their parents. I used to work in Spain, and I used to force my son, who is a medical doctor today, to study harder. And I used to tell him, look, those friends coming each day to ask you, his name is Diga, and they'll say, Diga is there? Is Diga there? They had the ball and they are going to play football. Look, you don't belong to this game. You need to play with them, but you need to know that you have to work harder. We have no house that I will let you inherit, so you have to work harder for that. You see, that boy is the only son of his father and mother. Their house is his house. These messages they look stupid and banal. We need to consume some of the things that we produce. If for instance, somebody won a competition on a Truth FM, and you offer him a ticket to Europe or to the Americas, do you think of the cultural and therefore economic consequences of that, as opposed to offering him a ticket to Nairobi or to Lusaka or to something? These are the kinds of situations in which we as Africans have put ourselves, as far as I'm concerned, in which we are doing tremendous harm to ourselves and only blaming the people from abroad. Even when we have chances to look at our own issues, to look at whether during the receptions, foods made by African people have a chance to be put on the table, or whether we want to serve caviar. These are very basic choices where we start. You know, 30, 40 years ago, things made in China were looked at with derision. But they were producing and learning.
Yeah.
We cannot refuse to learn and hope to arrive at the destination.
And we should accept to suffer for what we want.
We have to suffer for what we want.
Wonderful, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having breakfast with us. Let's get some interaction from our listeners out there. 077-469794.
077-469793 is the line to call. 077-469793 is the line to call to be a part of this discussion with the ambassador. 077-469793. And we have the first caller. Good morning, you're live. Please go ahead, sir. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Sorry, I didn't.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation from the ambassador. But I'd just like to give homage to some of our leaders from 1961 to 1973. Some of them that got murdered. Like Lunga in 1961, the opposition leader of Cameroon, which of course the ambassador from the next door, was put in 1960.
go ahead, you lie. You lie. You want to change your position? Line is breaking. Okay, go ahead. Okay, now go ahead. I think this has come out first. So we'll give you the time to talk about the nature of the democracy and what has happened. The 07774697994.
Let's take this call. Good morning. Good morning, you're live. Too bad. Your line is cracking. You have to walk away from where you are.
Okay, thank you. We can continue with that towards the close of this program.
Yes, thank you very much, Mamadi. Yes, the President of Cameroon, His Excellency Paul Biya, has been in power for a long time. But you know, these issues are issues of election. The elections take place. The elections are conducted with observers. The elections are done, and in the last years we have modernized the electoral process using electronic means and so on, which even the embassy now in Monrovia is aligned to register Cameroonian voters abroad, and we've voted once already. And so I think we are looking at how the president gets to stay in power. He is not using the military to put himself in power. He's using an electoral and democratic process to be in power. And in any case, we are up till now that we have had attacks from external sources. We pride ourselves as being an island of peace in the zones where we live. This must owe something to the leadership. And in the final analysis, what is required is to see that roads are being built. The agriculture sector is developing. We are going into second generation agriculture. We provide food for ourselves. 9 state universities have been built under President Paul Biya. Hospitals are being provided with magnetic resonance imagery, which are, you know, latest issues in the state-of-the-art things in the medical sector. And I can quote that on and on and on for you. So the important thing is that work is being done. It's not about who is doing this work. The important thing is that work is being done, and the Cameroonians are with their president, and that is what I can say about that. Each country deserves the leader that it gets.
You said this so many times on the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
homage to Lum, yes.
Before you go today, what is happening? We are National Day. Are we celebrating?
Well, yes, we are going to have a usual reception for our friends of the diplomatic and the corps and the government and our citizens this evening. We already had the 50th anniversary of our reunification earlier on this year, which was also grandiosely attended by our friends in Liberia, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs was our special guest. And he remarked on this when he visited Cameroon just on the 4th and 5th to the 4th to the 7th of May this year. He just came back from Cameroon to say that on another level cooperation is developing very well. So we have a celebration, yes, this evening. We always try to find a little means to make a celebration,
to make it people happy,
and pat ourselves on the back.
Okay. How long have you been in Liberia?
Well,
how long have you been in Liberia?
I've been in Liberia for just over 5 years now.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it. Well, the gentleman from Sao Bozo raised the issue of my not making sufficient, giving sufficient recognition to the heroes of independence. Yes, I think I bow down to that comment, but not because I neglected these people. You know, the independence struggle for Cameroon itself was achieved in bloodshed to a certain degree. Some people say we lost more than 11,000 people in this battle for the kind of independence that we wanted. And people like Mr. Mumie, who, as he said, was poisoned abroad, were some of the victims of this. People like him and people like Umnyore are already being recognized as martyrs of Cameroon and people who advocated strongly for African unity. So I accept the comment which he made. And the way the questions were asked, I focused more on the independence years when it was President Amadou Ahidjo in power. But my President Paul Biya has continued to be very active in the African Union. First, we pay our dues, because it's not only about attending meetings and not paying our dues so that the organization can manage to do what it has to do to help the individual countries. He has hosted in 1996 the African Union Summit in Cameroon, and things like the Economic Community of Central African States, which is the cousin of the ECOWAS here, are actually part of the results of the 1963 agreement as to functional approach to African unity. And so he is strongly an advocate of these organizations, and he has been fighting to have a free movement of people between our two countries. And I agree with the gentleman who says that, although the line was breaking, and we didn't get him very well, that we don't always tell our children the truth. We should tell our children the truth, however hard it be. And he says that he disagrees with my choice of the word that we should suffer for what we want, that we should rather work for what we want. Good friendship requires that I should accept his comment and say we are saying the same thing. But I accept his comment that we should work. I shouldn't frighten the children by telling them that we should suffer, we should work.
Okay. Ambassador Augustine, thank you very much for sharing breakfast with us. We wish you the best and happy National Day.
It's one of the best breakfasts I have had for a long time, and definitely I may stay on for supper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's it. We come to the end of today's presentation of the show. Inshallah, we're going to be here tomorrow. The Ambassador of Nigeria will be here to talk about Nigeria's role in the fight for freedom in Africa, and of course the rest of them. I have been Mamadi for and on behalf of my friend and brother Solomon Webb. We wish you all the best. Please let all of us work hard to maintain Pan-Africanism. Thank you.